Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do: to educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's show. Today, we are going to be talking about consciousness, and it's going to be curious to see where this discussion goes. Some of you who are listening to the podcast are religious in your orientation. I would imagine most of you are philosophical in your orientation. We certainly have some people here that identify as atheists and religious types. I know I've had conversations with you all via DMs and support and all of that kind of stuff. And I like the fact that there's such a broad audience for Next Level Human, and that both religious, different types of religions, types of people, and philosophically oriented people, and individuals who really have no belief, really, atheists. And I think most of you know I would probably most aptly classify myself as agnostic, meaning that I'm not convinced that it is wise to claim I either do or do not know for sure what is the nature of the universe and what is going on. However, in today's episode, we are going to talk a little bit about one belief system that I have been introduced to here very recently in the last 6 months and have been studying. And I want to talk to you today about this and weave in some of my beliefs. So as you're listening to this, as with most things with Next Level Human, what you want to do is you want to listen loosely. And what I mean by that is try not to become attached or triggered or anything else regarding this in terms of your beliefs. What you want to do is enter into this podcast with a loosely held orientation, if possible, being as humble in your belief system as you can, because what I'm going to present, I think, has utility for all of us in terms of how we may be able to orient our different belief systems into a better organizing framework, perhaps, around consciousness. And this discussion of consciousness oftentimes goes to aspects of the spiritual conversation that I think can be confusing for some people at best and irritating at worst. And these orientations would be things around what I would call spiritualist ideas or New Age ideas, things like the law of attraction, that the universe is somehow conspiring in your favor, or the universe has your back, so to speak. And this is oftentimes couched under the guise of quantum physics being something that proves these things, when in reality, I think if you talk to a true quantum physicist, which I am not, you will find out pretty quickly that that is not the case at all, that most people do not understand quantum physics at all. And most quantum physicists who study this thing their whole life will be quick to tell you they don't even quite understand it, but a lot of the things in quantum physics are sort of misattributed or misunderstood and claim to have a New Age and, sort of spiritual magic associated with them. We might call this spiritual woo or New Age inclinations. Now, let me be clear, from my perspective, I really don't think there's anything wrong with these things. Yes, they can at sometimes be a bit annoying, and not annoying because they don't jive with my beliefs, just annoying because we don't necessarily know. And I know that can be a little bit annoying. But it is fun and perhaps very useful to play with beliefs. And let me tell you what I mean by this. What I have found in my work, first as a functional medicine clinician, and then later on, as I've delved more and more into psychology, philosophy, and doing more life coaching work, is that what someone believes and holds to be true has a huge implication on the way the world shows up for them and the way that they can bounce back from negative events in their lives. And from my perspective, whatever belief someone holds is perfect from my perspective, so long as it meets two criteria. Criteria one being that it is helpful to them, that it helps them manage life, which can be, as we know, very difficult, very troubling, very trying at times. As the Buddhists say, life is suffering. And that's one of the first things that we need to understand about life. Life is not fair. Life can be incredibly difficult. We get to happen to life, but life oftentimes happens back. And so our beliefs, at best, should help us weather the storms of life. Should they not? Isn't this the entire point, perhaps, of religious orientations, philosophical orientations, and ethics and morals, and these kinds of things that help keep us on the straight and narrow? We all need both lighthouses and anchors in the storms of life, which will inevitably come. We all are going to suffer. That is one thing that we know. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is inevitable. Pain being physical pain, suffering being emotional pain. We are going to deal with things in our life that are not easy. We are all going to age. We are all going to die. These things are certain. So our beliefs should help us in this regard. And criteria two should be that they don't hurt others in the process. And from this orientation, you can see that many, many beliefs could help a person, but also in their action and in their practice, hurt others. So they can help us and hurt others. They can also hurt us and hurt others. And they also can help us and help others. And so my only true orientation has become, whatever your belief is, I don't care if you believe that the universe is being run by a giant pink dinosaur. So long as that belief helps you and helps others, then I am all for that belief. Now, what I'm going to present today is a belief system that I think is directly compatible with many other belief systems, and that may be something to begin to consider. Because when we think about beliefs in the modern age, what we normally have is there's very few people that believe strictly in one thing. Their beliefs oftentimes diverge and meander and move up and down and side to side. There might be some, sort of Christian religious undertones. There might be some Buddhist and or Hinduism and or Taoist philosophy mixed in. And most of us really, when you really get down to it, there's very few fundamentalists left in the world that have a very strict interpretation in a religious sense of what the world is and lives their life that way. Most people have adjusted these religious doctrines and philosophical discussions and beliefs and come up with sort of their own hodgepodge of ways of looking at the world. And many of us might say this is new agey. Some of us might just call this the new spiritualism. There's many different ways to look at it, but I think we could admit that if you took, 100 Christians or 1,000 Christians or 1,000,000 Christians and 1,000,000 Buddhists and 1,000,000 Jewish individuals and 1,000,000 New Age type people, and none of them are going to have exactly the same beliefs. So these beliefs do change and are held in different ways. And ultimately, we want to be able to have beliefs that serve us while not hurting others and hopefully help us and help others. And so to that to that bent, to that discussion, we're going to have a discussion today with two sort of philosophies or metaphysics. Now, if you're not used to reading philosophy and you don't understand what the term metaphysics means, it just simply means our sort of understanding of reality, the way that we think reality manifests. And so if you're have a Christian metaphysics, your reality is one that would be that there is a God, a man God, an anthropomorphic God that essentially is looking after humans, and that there is a heaven and a hell and all the things that entail a sort of Christian metaphysics. Now, if you are someone who has more of a Taoistic or Taoist metaphysics, you will not necessarily see universe as a consciousness that is aware of and or concerned with humans. You will more see this as a philosophical creative force that sort of is nameless, formless, shapeless, that does animate the world, that has creative potential, but is not really able to be truly known in that sense. And so there are very different types of metaphysics from that perspective. And we're going to talk about two of the big ones in philosophy, one being materialism, which is the metaphysics and or belief that matter, in a sense, creates consciousness. And then we're also going to be talking a little bit about the idea of idealism, which is, strictly speaking, the opposite, which says that consciousness or mind creates matter. And I'm going to be suggesting, at least loosely and humbly, that idealism may be the way that we want to be looking at the world, and that Taoism, which is my orientation, my primary orientation or metaphysics, is more idealistic in its nature. Now, why would I be doing that? Am I doing this so that you would take on an idealistic philosophy? Absolutely not. I'm doing it because I think there might be some compatibility between this idealist view and many of the views that New Age individuals and spiritualists look at things. And I also think you might find, very curiously, that the idealistic view also is far more compatible with a religious God orientation or as well, and that materialism may not necessarily be. Now, let me be right up front here. Many of you listening to this may have more of a background on this stuff than I do. I'm just doing this podcast today because this is what I've been studying for the last 6 months. Primarily, if you're interested in one of the books that I've read, which I've now read 5 times, which probably isn't enough, but it is a book called Materialism is Baloney by Bernardo Kastrup. And I'm probably going to butcher his ideas, but that book also sent me tearing through the idealistic world and the non-dualistic world, looking at people like Rupert Spira and others who hold this belief system. And from me, I've been playing around with this belief system because it seems to fit nicely with the Taoistic way that I look at the world, but it also has seemed to bring up questions for me and information for me that has been extremely useful in adjusting perhaps my belief in a direction that is helpful for me and perhaps will be helpful for others. And so this is really one of these podcasts that is an idea-based podcast. And so let's get into this. So the modern day way of looking at metaphysics from the scientific point of view has really veered very close to materialism. Now, by the way, I don't know if materialism is true. I don't know if idealism is true. I am presenting these as a way to orient you as a introduction into these ideas. And the materialistic viewpoint is the viewpoint that most scientists currently hold. And the view goes something like this, that as we as a species, as we evolved, our nervous systems, as they've gotten more and more complicated and more processing power, that as that begins to occur, consciousness sort of spontaneously arises out of this. And so that our brain action create consciousness, create the ability to be conscious. And when I'm talking about conscious here, I'm really talking about this idea of consciousness from the perspective of being aware that we are aware. Now, people talk an awful lot about this, but we humans, along with perhaps many other animals, can be aware that we are aware. We can analyze our own thoughts. We can be self-reflective in a way, looking at ourselves, thinking about what we are thinking about, right? So we are aware that we are aware, and we are aware that we are aware that we are aware. It's almost as if we found ourselves, if you could imagine, in one of these fun houses in the circus where we're in a mirror house and we walk in and there's a mirror behind us and in front of us. And when we look into the mirror in front of us, we can see ourselves again and again and again and again and again and again. And when we get in these sort of fun houses and these sort of where these circuses that have these fun houses, and we get into some of these mirror houses, we can also oftentimes be confused and become confused about which of those images is actually us, because all of a sudden they're so reflective and almost infinite visions of ourselves show up, don't they? And so materialism essentially says that as our brain and nervous system processing becomes more complex, consciousness arises out of this, and this self-reflective capacity sort of arises. And once that happens, we have to ask ourselves the question, what world are we aware of? And what are we sort of looking at? What world are we navigating? Is this a world that is just an illusion that we create ourselves? Can we be sure that there are any other people who are conscious? And materialism essentially says that, in a sense, the world that we see is a world out there that is separate from us, but it's not exactly what we see. It's slightly different. In other words, we are seeing something, but our senses and pick it up imperfectly. And so we can never be quite sure what is going on out there and what really is out there. So if I'm sitting here talking right now to you, doing this podcast, looking into my phone, talking into this microphone, materialism would say there is a phone out there. There is an object that is a phone. There is an object that is a camcorder. There is an object that is, a microphone that I'm speaking into. But the way that I perceive those things isn't exactly as they are. In fact, they are different. And in a sense, I am just operating an illusion. So there's two worlds in a sense. There's the world that I am generating this consciousness. And there's the world outside of me that is picking up that I am picking up and being aware of. And that I can't possibly know what this world is. And in fact, that this world is the very world that makes up consciousness in the first place, since the matter that my brain is made up of, where all these connections are happening, is the building blocks to my brain. And so in a very weird way, when you follow materialism to its core, it essentially says we are made up of things that generate, the ability to pick up a world that we can't be sure of exists in the first place. And so in a very real way, as a metaphysics, materialism is a metaphysics, a belief system, a view of reality that is in a sense non-falsifiable. In other words, we can't really prove that this is real, can we? Since there's a world out there that we can't necessarily truly know that creates our brain that then helps us pick up this world that we don't truly know. And this is kind of the world that the current scientific world sort of says is true. This metaphysics of materialism tends to dominate, that matter creates mind rather than the other way around. So what does idealism then say? Well, idealism essentially says that everything is mind. Everything is consciousness, in a sense. We are consciousness. And consciousness is creating matter. And so that me and this microphone I'm talking into and this phone that I am speaking into that's capturing my image, we are made of the exact same thing. We are all manifestations of mind. And so that there is a world out there in a sense, but we can't necessarily, as individuals, see this in the same way we can't, as Alan Watts would say, bite our own teeth in a sense, or see our own eyes in a sense, because we are mind in mind. In other words, it's all just mind. It's all just consciousness. And as you look around at the things in the world, these are different expressions of mind, and there is nothing else. So there is no other world out there. When I see the phone or talking to the microphone, I really am seeing the phone and talking into the microphone. And yet they are made of the same material that I am made of. It is all just consciousness in a sense. And my brain, our brains, are simply a filter for this universal consciousness, almost like an antenna that downloads certain segments of this consciousness, and that time and space are, and the senses, seeing, tasting, hearing, touching, all of these kinds of things are ways that we experience this consciousness, which we are. So in a very real sense, the idealist philosophy might say something along the lines of, we are fish made of water swimming in an ocean that has no surface and no bottom, and has no beginning, no shore, and no end. So we are fish made of water, swimming in water, unaware that we are the exact same thing that we perceive. This is the idealistic philosophy. Let me interrupt the show just for a few minutes because I want to tell you about one of our sponsors, Evolve Telemed. One of the questions I get all of the time, one of the services that you are asking me for constantly, is hormone replacement therapy. Women going through menopause, women going through perimenopause, women in postmenopause, women under stressful situations who are dealing with low sex hormone levels, estrogen and progesterone, are constantly asking me about progesterone therapy or estrogen and progesterone therapy. And men, same thing, constantly asking me about testosterone replacement therapy. Plenty of you, many of you, always asking, Jade, can you prescribe me hormones? I need testosterone if you're a man, or I need estrogen and progesterone or testosterone if you're a woman. And I always have to say that I am no longer seeing patients in this way because my educational duties are keeping me so busy. And this is where Evolve Telemed comes in. I have been looking for a company that does bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, and that is critically important. If you're going to be doing HRT or TRT, HRT being hormone replacement therapy for women, TRT being testosterone replacement therapy for men, if you are going to do these therapies, you want the bioidentical hormones. You want the hormones that your body makes naturally, that your body can recognize, that is no different from the hormones your body would make if you were making adequate levels. Bioidentical hormone replacement therapy does just this. And Evolve Telemed is a company that I am now using for my own testosterone replacement needs, and have been super impressed with the way that they have structured their business model. And so I am now bringing this service to you through my partnership with Evolve Telemed. Essentially, the way this works is you go online, you make an appointment with Evolve. Evolve gets a doctor with you on a Zoom call. They go through your whole case. They go through your blood labs. They then prescribe your hormones directly to you, and you can get those hormones wherever you are.
You do not have to go to a clinic near you. All you need is to have an internet access point, and you can meet with an expert in bioidentical hormone replacement therapy and get those prescriptions. Now you can see why this is so powerful, can't you? Because this is something that so many of us need and can benefit from for our aging needs, our sexual health needs. These things have profound impact on mood, hair, skin, erections, libido, you name it. These things do everything for our metabolic health and vitality. So I am incredibly excited to bring Evolve Telemed to you. Now, the link that you go to is drjade.com/hormones. drjade.com/hormones. This will bring you to the Evolve Telemed portal. If you use the code NEXTLEVEL, you will get a discount on checkout for your first patient visit. I'm very excited to be able to bring this to you, and I hope you will use Evolve Telemed. I know you're going to find it extremely powerful to move your hormone needs over to them. Check them out, Evolve Telemed. Use the link drjade.com/hormones. drjade.com/hormones for Evolve Telemed. And let's get back to the show.
And so one of the ways that you can think about this is you can think about this idea. Imagine you're looking at a lake, a body of water, and it's one of these completely still bodies of water that when you look in, it reflects. It has this reflective capacity that essentially allows you to reflect anything on top of it. And you can kind of think of this as when this body of water becomes disturbed and has ripples put upon it, it creates waves. And as those waves form, as you look from one wave across the crest to another wave, you get this little trough, don't you? And at that point, you can see that there's some self-reflection happening. This mirror effect. In other words, one wave that is peaking is reflecting the other wave that is peaking, and there is this recognition across that divide of two waves. This self-reflective capacity begins to occur. And this now appears a lot like that funhouse we were talking about, doesn't it? Where you can see across this mirror, this divide. And when you do this, the consciousness that is occurring right there, this is where ego consciousness perhaps occurs. As soon as consciousness can become self-aware and reflect upon itself and essentially see itself almost like a, sort of a whirlpool forming in the middle of a lake, where across that boundary you can see yourself, or consciousness can see itself. This in idealism is what someone like a Bernardo Kastrup is referring to as ego consciousness. This idea that once this mind, this consciousness begins to form waves or ripples, and these ripples form these sort of troughs and crests, and there can be self-reflection across two waves, ego consciousness, in a sense, develops. In other words, we can then see ourselves. We can become aware that we are aware. And this, in the idealistic way of looking at it, is how we begin to form consciousness. Now, you can imagine as Jade Teta or you begin to form consciousness in one localized aspect of this infinite mind, I can then become self-aware of me. And you then could form also a whirlpool somewhere within this body of mind. And so could other individuals. And the reason, perhaps, that we don't remember, don't understand that we are all just part of the same exact consciousness or mind is because, in the words of Bernardo Kastrup, we become self-obfuscated in a sense. In other words, If I go outside in the middle of the day and look up at the sky, the bright sky, I won't see any stars. But those stars and the light that they are releasing are still reaching my eyes. They're just obfuscated or drowned out or blared out by the more powerful light of the sun. So now you could imagine the same thing could be happening when we become self-aware through this self-reflective aspect of universal consciousness. We become self-aware of ourselves. We get trapped in this funhouse, this aspect of these self-reflective, continuous reflections of these mirror images, and we forget that we are part of something larger. In the same way that when we're outside in the middle of the day, we forget that there are stars shining, even though they are, and even though that light is still reaching us. And this obfuscation makes us miss our connection to other humans and the greater source consciousness. So you might say, well, Jade, why are you going through this? And maybe this is sounding really confusing. I'm going through this because I have one of these pet peeves that something that I find troubling. And one of and just see what you think about this as well, because perhaps you don't find it troubling at all. But I hear many, many people speak in very spiritual, very flowery, in this very light, spiritual, flower, sweet type language. We're all connected. Everybody is one. Love and light. You've heard these terminologies. And then I'm shocked to see some of these people behave and act and think and talk in ways that are completely destructive to themselves and completely destructive to other people. Sometimes in violent ways, sometimes in destructive ways to themselves and others. And for me, I go, why is this the case? And many mystical traditions talk about this idea that the illusion of separateness from source consciousness is the sort of source of all fear and the source of our need to try to control others and try to chase power and forget that you are connected to me and I am connected to you and we are connected to them. And in a sense, we are derived from the same universal consciousness. And maybe now you're starting to see why this idea is perhaps a useful one to try on, even if it's not particularly true in your mind or my mind or true in general. You could see that this idea of idealism begins to become fairly useful because it gives us a way of understanding the world that we see is the world that we see, that it is derived of the same material that we are, that we misapprehend our separateness from it, and as such, we create suffering where suffering may not necessarily belong, and we forget in a very powerful way that we are connected one to the other, that you are me in a sense, I am you. We are each individual reflections, expressions of source consciousness. And if you want to call source consciousness God, you certainly could. And this starts to then get into a very inclusive way of having a metaphysics that can be very inclusive of many metaphysical ideas. And in my mind, many religious orientations as well, because it looks and essentially says, perhaps there is a source consciousness. There is a one creative force. And in a very real sense, this could be what many monotheistic religions call God. And in a sense, this could be, in a sense, what the Taoists call Tao, this creative universal consciousness that, essentially is animating all of life. And in a very real sense, this begins to teach us some of the mystical traditions and certainly some of the things that some people feel they tap into when they are doing meditation or when they are having sex or when they are having a psychedelic experience or any of these things, exercise. Whenever we tap into this feeling of euphoria that we are connected, that we are one, when we are praying, when we are meditating, this perhaps is the universal source consciousness that we are all essentially tapping into, that we are all a part of. And this idealist metaphysics begins to make this very tangible. At least it has made it more tangible for me. And it begins to address this idea of, okay, Jade, then why do we feel so separate? And what are we exactly? Well, if we are filters for consciousness, what that would mean is, if you can imagine, I'm a child of the 80s and I was born in 1973. So I still remember those old radios that you reached out with your fingers and tuned the dial. And it would sort of make this weird like sound until you hit on, 107 FM or something like that, where you could tune into a particular radio station. So if you imagine each of our brains as a filter for consciousness, and I, let's say, am 107 FM on that particular station, or if you want to think about this as a YouTube channel or a Spotify playlist, I'm tuned into a particular genre of universal music, which makes me look a particular way, feel a particular way, think a particular way, have a unique place in the context of space and time that makes Jade unique and makes me slightly different and experiences this universal consciousness in a slightly different way than you do. And the same way that a dog has a different consciousness. And maybe, humans are the FM channel and dogs are the AM channel, and other animals each have their own channels, and each of their uniqueness is being filtered in this way, in a very in the way that we might filter a satellite signal or radio signals. And this is what makes us all unique. And this obfuscation, this self-reflective capacity that forms each of our egos, is what gives us the illusion that we are separate, but in reality, we are not. And this becomes pretty powerful way to begin looking at this, because then it begins to explain why, for example, throughout history, before the internet, we have learned about people who are working on particular problems, picking up things from dreams, having psychedelic experiences, picking up things seemingly out of the ether, working on problems, scientific problems, and then having someone all across the world, the planet, who knew nothing of this other person, who lived in a different culture, who was absolutely tapped into and working on the exact same problem, yet they had no way of knowing that each other were there. It could explain things like extrasensory perceptions, perhaps, near-death experiences, and the very interesting commonalities between people when they go through near-death experiences. They can start to perhaps explain things that science, in its traditional materialistic way of looking at things, has not been able to explain. And what's interesting about this idealist metaphysics is it doesn't contradict at all any of the known laws of science. It just presents a different way of looking at it. Instead of it being the hand going, or, sort of the glove going on the hand, it's more the hand going in to the glove, so to speak. It's just an inversion of something that perhaps is more useful for us as an explanatory mechanism for many of the things that both mystics and science and history have shown us over the years. And this is why this can be so powerful, which brings me to my final sort of musings on this subject. You have oftentimes heard me, listening to this podcast, say that we are each of us is a unique spiritual fingerprint. In other words, each human on the planet is unique. There has never been another you in the history of humanity, nor will there ever be again. And part of that has to do with your unique genetics, your unique personality, your unique occupying time in history, and your context of the space in which you live. None of these things are the same as they have ever been, nor will they ever be. Life is constantly changing. So you are unique. You also are unique in your experiences, the people who have hurt and helped you. Your passions, the thing that you are interested in, your superpowers, your talents, the things you're really, really good at. Your personality, which we already said, which incorporates your perception and your unique perspective. And of course, your pain and your suffering. And all of this makes you incredibly unique. And then that brings us to the question of, well, you are here. You are a unique expression of this source consciousness. If that is true, and if you understand this, then it pushes you to understand you are a unique spiritual fingerprint and, perhaps most importantly, a unique purpose potential. In fact, there is something perhaps that you can do in a way that no one else can do. Even if you and I teach the same things, you teach self-development, personal development, you teach metabolism. But there's something unique about your voice. There's something unique about your perspective. There's something unique about the way you say it, the way you internalize it, the way that you teach it that will move people in a way that I never could. So even if we were born the same year, even if we are siblings, even if we have as close to as possible of the same upbringing, you, by your very nature, are going to be unique in a sense. And this brings me to this idea that this source consciousness, which we are all uniquely a part of, and which we sometimes forget, is still interacting with us in a way. It's still pushing us. It's still influencing us. How could it not be? And that this perhaps is the thing that we need to be tapping into. And that perhaps as we walk through the world, our unique way of perceiving and interacting with this source consciousness that we are a part of is exactly what we need to be doing. And that the culture level way of copycatting everyone else that you see goes against this principle. And the base level way of pretending that I am the only person that matters on the world and that I'm completely separate from you also goes against this idealist way of looking at things and this nature of source consciousness. And perhaps this is why we have to understand that a next level human is someone that understands this and understands that they must always see themselves as an individual expression of source consciousness, while simultaneously understanding they are also a direct connection to source consciousness and to you as also a direct connection to source consciousness, which means we must always take care of ourselves and other because both are the same. You are me. I am you. We are them. They are us in a sense. And isn't this the nature of all spiritual, religious underpinnings in a very real sense? You can find this in every single religious allegory, myth, anything like that that you could possibly imagine. And these myths and these religions and these stories don't have to be literally true to express this universal truth. And so you do not have to take the Bible, for instance, as the literal word of God. You can still find, for example, universal truths in the stories. And the same goes for Judaism, and the same goes for Islam, and the same goes for any philosophical tradition or any mythological tradition from any of these ancient cultures. And when you begin to look at it this way, it begins to open up your mind in a sense to begin free you from the judgment about other people's beliefs, free you from the judgment about the need for your beliefs to be completely true, and allows you to begin to understand yourself and the consciousness and mind that you are derived from or an extension of. And I'm hoping that you begin to see this as something that is profound and something that can profoundly begin to free us from some of the suffering that we might have. And the final thing I would say here is if this source consciousness is the nature of it is such that it is self-reflective and that we are that an expression of that self-reflective process, and that we can't, in a sense, look at our own eyes or bite our own teeth without some of this self-reflective process, without the help of a mirror, so to speak, to actually see us and become aware that we're aware, that perhaps we are the very ways in which this source consciousness dreams itself or perceives itself. Perhaps, in a very real sense, without us, source consciousness would not be able to experience itself at all. And that us living our unique lives and following our purpose potential and being true to our spiritual fingerprint is exactly the point and is what evolves this source consciousness in the first place. And in this way, we are, in a sense, the instruments of God or source consciousness, right? We are an extension of source consciousness. If you think about our bodies as an analogy of source consciousness, then some of us are fingers. Others of us are toes. Some of us are elbows. Some of us are feet. We can't move. The world doesn't move without us being expressions and living out the expressions of our lives, which means we must do that from a perspective from now on of attending to our individual nature while also never forgetting we are connected to every other conscious being because we are all extensions of source consciousness. Like a giant octopus, universal octopus, with all these little suction cups all over all its legs. And then if you look closely, also all these little bumps all over its skin, with each of us being one of these bumps, one of these suction cups, a unique place in the infinite universal source consciousness that has a unique nervous system and a unique sensing apparatus that senses and samples one small aspect of the universe. And how powerful this could be if we begin to take on the job of evolving source consciousness. Because when we think about what source consciousness is, if it includes everybody and everything, then that means it is integrative. It has to integrate everything. Then that means it's holistic. Then that means it's never divisive. It's never dividing because it's all the same thing. And then so we can now become spiritual in our thinking and our actions by realizing that anytime we divide, dehumanize, try to have non-integrative thinking, non-holistic ways of living, trying to go against the universal source nature, we are perturbing and devolving and degrading source consciousness and therefore ourselves. And anytime that we are inclusive and integrative and holistic in our ways of living and being with other people, with animals, with the planet, with the universe at whole, then we evolve source consciousness and ourselves. And that this is the path of the next level human. So I'm going to stop right there today and let this sit with you, this unique aspect of you and me and how we are all perhaps just expressions, nervous system expressions, unique points within this infinite ocean. We are fish made of water, swimming in water. I'll see you at the next show.